Welcome to the Fractured Families Podcast. I'm Charity, your dedicated parental alienation coach, here to guide and support families as they navigate the challenges of high conflict divorces and custody battles. On this podcast, we'll share insights, practical strategies, and hope for those on the journey toward healing and justice. Whether you're personally experiencing these challenges or just want to learn more about the complexities of parental alienation and custody disputes, you're in the right place. You are not alone. This is the Fractured Families Podcast, where every voice matters and every story is heard. And if you find my conversation helpful, don't forget to like, subscribe, and share. Your support helps us reach more families who need it. Thank you for joining me for the Fractured Families Podcast. I'm Charity, your host. I have with me today John Thaler, who is an alienated father and a lawyer. John is going to bring us his personal story of alienation and his son being abducted, as well as offer some insight and thoughts and ideas about parents going through alienation from a legal perspective. John, thanks for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah, of course. So John, quite the case you have here. It's tragic, it's complex, it's riddled with corruption. And I'm sure anyone that's listening to this says, oh yeah, so is our case, and as many are. You bring to us a unique perspective of being an alienated parent and a lawyer and a litigant. So we don't have a lot of that. Had we had a lot of that, maybe the outcomes would be different. But even in your case, because of the corruption, it was a negative outcome. So why don't you get us started on your story?
Well, it's a complicated story. And as a result, I wrote a very large book about it because I thought, one of the things that I think most alienated parents understand is that it's oftentimes very hard to get people to believe you. So if you don't put it in writing, or if you have to keep rewriting it over and over and over into a brief for the court, it gets very tiresome and very emotional. That's the big thing, is that you're writing over and over about how your child was stolen. So I did something that a lot of people don't do. I wrote a book. It's not my first. It probably won't be my last. It's kind of over my shoulder here, which tells the whole story. So I'm going to break it down into some simple stuff, because otherwise we'll be here for a day and a half on this. Okay. The essentials of this is that I got remarried in 2016, a very lovely person who turned out to be part of a criminal family. And by criminal family, they were not going out and robbing banks, but what they were essentially doing was money laundering. They were money laundering in the state of Arizona. They were money laundering essentially for cartels. They were doing it in a very complicated manner. And shortly after our son was born, who is just over my shoulder here, McKinley, I discovered that, my wife wasn't in some ways who she said she was. And at the same time, there were issues going on in Arizona that my law office, which does a lot of investigation, was asked to investigate. And it turned out that the investigations I was on coalesced into what her family did. And when that happened, her way of dealing with it, because she was afraid that I was going to take our child from her, which was not going to happen, but her fear of that caused her instead to take our child and essentially do almost anything and everything within the system, a lot of which, involved bribing individuals within the system to prevent me from seeing him, having a relationship with him, etc., again, because of her fear that I would take him away from her. And so it's now been a little over 4 years. I have not seen him since. I don't get Father's Day cards. I don't get Christmas cards. I don't get birthday cards or anything. I do know in this case where he is, which does help, but I have been entirely, completely shut out. Meanwhile, the court system in Arizona is so entirely corrupt at almost every level, from the city court to the superior court on up, that trying to get help is very difficult, either because judges involved are specifically corrupt. In my particular case, just so people understand, there are over 35 separate falsified court orders that were prepared and loaded into the system. And despite the fact that they are obvious forgeries, despite the fact that we have a forensic question documents examiner explain the forgeries, trying to get anybody to help is difficult. Like I said, they're either a part of the problem or they are friends with the people who are. And that makes it extremely difficult to get anybody to rule. Now, that does not mean things don't go on behind the scenes. They do. But most of the remedies I have to seek these days are really in federal court and not in state court as a result of the corruption.
So she recognizes that she's going to be investigated. She knows you're part of that investigation. Prior to that happening, how was the household? You, her, and your son. What was that like?
The household is really interesting. We met because she was also in the law business. She was not a lawyer. She was a trial paralegal. We met kind of by what I believed was happenstance. There's a much bigger story about this, where she actually set out to meet me several years before we actually met. And I had absolutely no idea. And again, I talk about it in the book because it involves another criminal scheme that she was involved in. and where she wanted to actually meet me. When we did meet, it was a really terrific romance. We had a lot of things in common. We enjoyed each other's company. And I think, as most people would say, for the first 2 years or so of the relationship, we were reasonably inseparable. And the reason for it was in large part because she was really trying to get out of the family business. She had a real job. She was a trial paralegal. She was making her own money. She had her own life. And what she really craved for was normalcy. A husband, a child, a family, a nice suburban home, which we had in Gilbert, Arizona. And it was a wonderful deal. And I think that most people who saw us would say so. But shortly after our child was born, there were things going on with her. There were issues going on with her and her family, things that, I could see going on, but nobody was telling me. And then when I started to discover roughly in early 2019 what this was all about and what she was involved in, and that her family wanted her continued participation in it, that's when this went downhill very quickly. And it got to the point between 2019 and 2021 where there were at least 7 known attempts on my life. There was an attempt that didn't hit me, but basically hit a client and almost killed a client. There were, a number of probable attempts, where they were going to attempt but never got to it. And, a total complete disruption for our son. At one point, she actually came to me, and this is very different than most other stories. She actually came to me in late 2019 and actually asked myself and a colleague of mine to put her into federal witness protection. And we actually did the interview and started to work the paperwork that's necessary with the Justice Department to do it, when the threats against her, against me, against our son became too great, that she decided to go a different way, and that was to terminate the marriage, get out of any witness protection, and then ultimately to take our son and try to keep me from him for fear that I would take him from her.
So during that time, did it ever cross your mind that she had intended to take your son?
No, it didn't. I mean, you can look back at things now. One of the things that happened, for example, and it's literally in text messages, so it's evidence that's actually attached to the book, is she actually at one point offered to buy him from me. McKinley at the time was about 1.5 years, and she in text messages offered to give me approximately $100,000 if I would give up all parental rights. So that probably should have been a first indication of at least, if nothing else, the level of panic she was feeling. This was really out of the blue for her because she grew up in kind of a very, a distracted household with issues with her father that she has to this day. And so having a father for McKinley was very, very important to her. So for her to basically say, I'll take him, I'll give you money, and you just stay out of his life, was a very odd thing to do. The other reason it was very odd was because I have an older son. I have a 24-year-old, Matthew, who she had a really terrific relationship with, and who she even wanted to attend for college, University of Arizona, so that he could be near us and could come home on weekends. So, we had this really terrific familial relationship with, older boy, young boy, her and me, that was very, very, very important to her. So that's one of the reasons why it just didn't really occur to me that she would do this. But I also didn't know the level of trouble she was in. One of the things I try to do, the book is long. The report to the governor is about 630 pages, so it's a long book. We also have about 500 plus footnotes in there, which refer to about another 5,000 pages of evidentiary documents that were used in our investigation. So it's a lot of material. One of the things I try to do in the book, and I say this to people, and I even try to do it in what I write to the court, because I think it's kind of important, is to balance out the evil that she has done in taking our child with the complexities of her life. Not to make excuses, but it's one of the things, and it's one of the things we could talk about a little bit later. As I advise clients, if you simply make the other person the root of all evil, and that's it, you better be prepared to back that up. You can get people where that is the case. You can get sociopaths where that's the case. That absolutely happens. But in most cases, there's a balance. And to the degree that you can say positive things about the mother of the child, and you can't always, but to the degree that you can, it's important that that balances out. So, one of the things I do in the book is I talk about her complexities, how she grew up, the household that she was in, what caused all of this, what caused her to have these issues, so that the court can understand when I'm saying this is somebody who one day decided she was going to scheme to take this child. He understands what the background is that led to it. It wasn't just an all of a sudden snap decision to do it. It's something that I think she thought about for a great deal period of time. She understood the damage it was going to do to our child, and that was better for her than losing him altogether, which again is, like I said, is what she thought was going to happen.
So what do you think led her to think that she was going to lose him? Was it fear from her childhood, or was it the recognition of the legalities that she was dealing with?
Well, it's a combo of things, and part of it is that she has sociopathic tendencies. So her ability to connect emotionally with what she's doing is very minimal, and this is a common problem. You'll hear this more for divorce cases in terms of somebody being a narcissist, but in this case, it kind of means the same thing, and that's somebody who is so disconnected from normal emotion and feeling that they will do exactly that which is in their best interest regardless of who it hurts. So one of the problems here is that there were a lot of efforts she made during the early parts of the relationship and the marriage to deal with things from her childhood. I certainly didn't know the criminal part, but I knew that she had an unhappy childhood, and it was something she was willing to work on and deal with. The problem is that when you're living your entire life as a double life. I mean, she was involved in her family's crime business starting at about 8 years old. So from 8 years old on, if not earlier, she was living a double life, and you can only imagine what this is really like. You live in a normal city. Or you lived in Mesa. She grew up in Mesa, Arizona. She went to a normal high school, etc. She had, essentially normal friends. But you can't tell them what you do. You can't tell them what your family does. You can't discuss these things. You can't have a boyfriend or a husband where you talk about any of this. So you're already living in a kind of paranoid existence. The people, because this has a lot to do with drug cartels and narco dollars, and laundering, what is really billions of dollars, not just, a couple of 100,000, but really literally billions of dollars. You live in a paranoid existence. You live in an existence where you don't know if at any moment the police are going to come crashing down your door. With all the protection you buy, you don't know. And so what started to happen after McKinley was born, and as this started to get worse for her and I started to figure more and more out, is the paranoia came in. So she became absolutely a mess in every aspect of her life. She got fired from her job. She had several jobs. She got fired from them. She had a very hard time maintaining a household. She was literally in the throes of a nervous breakdown. So you have to start with the mental part of this, I think, is a big part. And I think that happens in a lot of these cases. There's a big mental health component to this. The second part was my experience. I don't do a ton of family law, but as you and I discussed earlier, my father did it for 50 years and was very famous for it in Los Angeles. And so I'm not unknown in this, and I certainly understand how all this works. And she certainly understood that I have friendships, longtime friendships with judges and certainly with prosecutors, et cetera. So she feared that if I started to discover the entirety of what she had been involved in, and how dangerous it had been to me and to our child, especially that part of it, that why would I not take him away? If her existence was a danger to McKinley, why would I not pick him up and take him away? And so I think that the combination of the paranoia and even some of the logic there, I think combined to cause this.
So talk us through the abduction.
Well, there was actually three.
Mm-hmm.
She first took him on his second birthday. His second birthday was December 12th. December 12th of 2017 was when he was born. On December 12th of 2019 is when she first took him. What happened is that she left in the morning to take him. It was a weekday morning. I believe it was a Wednesday or Thursday morning. She took him to go to the museum while I was working. The following day, on the Friday, I was going to take him to the zoo. So we kind of did this kind of trade-off. And we were, of course, going to have dinner with him that night. And he's only 2 years old. I mean, very smart 2 years old, but he's 2 years old. So she said goodbye in the morning. She left and literally never came back. And instead, she ignored phone calls, ignored communications, etc., went directly to her mother's house and kept him at her mother's house. And I'm not quite sure exactly what the theory was here, but the following day, on the 13th, on that Friday, she then filed a petition for dissolution of marriage, and at the same time asked the judge hearing the case to issue orders to keep me away from McKinley. There was not a lot of basis for it. Just things like, he gets angry or, he's mad or stuff like that. There was no specific set of issues as to why this should go on. But that's essentially what she said in the petitions. The petitions were denied. So now she's kind of out there with our child a couple of miles away from me at her mother's house. She's not coming home. And now what do? So ultimately, between her mother, who at the time, despite her mother's involvement in the criminal stuff, was trying to be helpful and did not want to see this happen, her mother and I kind of worked out a deal for her to basically return him. And finally, by around Christmas, he was brought to me so I could spend some time with him. But she would always insist it would be at a friend's house, it would be at a mutual friend, because again, she was worried I was going to literally put him in the car and drive off with him. And I didn't realize that that's what the deal was. She would literally, as I was spending my time with him, she would literally sit in a car across the street watching the entire time. Quite realize why she was doing this, but it was ultimately because she was afraid I was going to put him in the car and take him away. Again, that's how paranoid this got. And things got fine. We worked out a 50-50 agreement. We had it all worked out. Her mother, she made the exchanges with me for a while, but it got to the point where I used the Mesa Police Department as a go-between at various locations. And they have a program in Mesa. It's one of the few things. Mesa's a terrible, terrible place. But one of the things they actually do well is this, and that is they will get involved with custody exchanges at a neutral location to help facilitate them to make sure everything goes smoothly. And it got to the point literally where I had basically been McKinley's primary caregiver. So essentially I had, even through COVID, I was the person he saw in the morning. I'm the one he saw going to bed. He was mostly with me more so than with her. And what would happen was McKinley didn't want to go back. So it got to the point where when it was the day to take him back, which was fine, I had done this before. When it was time to take him back, we would meet up with the Mesa police. And it got to the point where literally it was taking 4 and 5 police officers to pull McKinley off of me to be able to give him back to her. And finally, Mesa got fed up with this and fed up with her and said, we just can't do this anymore. So after that, her mother and I worked it out to do the facilitating of the exchanges and did it. Ultimately, in February of 2000, we received a court order. We went into court, argued this out. She still argued for no custody. The judge said, that's insane. I'm awarding 50-50 custody, and did. And from that point on, for the next for about 6 weeks, that worked fine. It was then coming up, and there's something for people to never ever do. My birthday is on April 12th. Our anniversary is April 13th. Her birthday is April 14th. Never want to do that again. So we have this kind of block of days that are kind of meaningful to both of us. And I realized that my day fell on her birthday. So I offered to change that around so that she could have him on her birthday, which is, of course, what you're supposed to do as a parent. Of course. Same thing with Mother's Day and Father's Day. Until you get these things worked out, you always want to be the bigger person. Your child will love you for it in the end. And so I wrote over to her mother and I said, how about if we do this and this and this? Well, instead, on April 4th, so about a week before my birthday and her birthday, etc., she took him again. And same thing, where she didn't make the exchange. She was supposed to make an exchange with me on April 4th, never showed up, and never made the exchange. And so for the next 2 weeks, I filed motions with the family court, including contempt, to have her held in contempt of the order. And, because this was the beginning of COVID, it was very hard. You couldn't just show up in court anymore. You couldn't just do an ex parte application. You had to send stuff down and hope that somebody got to it. And you can't blame anybody for this. The courts didn't know what to do. They were essentially closed. The judges were getting stuff sent over to them by messenger half the time. So it was kind of a mess. It took about 2 weeks for the court to get back and to order her to return McKinley, and she finally did. Through the summer, there were issues, but generally not ones with the exchanges. We did fairly well. And there were some issues where if I was going to be running late or something, she would say, well, I'm just going to keep him for the night, dumb things like that. But for the most part, the exchanges worked. The problem is that at this point, she was literally planning the escape. And to that degree, she actually sent me on Father's Day. By the way, on Father's Day, which of course is a Sunday, she wouldn't let me have him, which made no sense, of course, but she wouldn't let me have him for Father's Day. And then what she then did was when she finally made the next exchange, her mother handed me a note from her. The note essentially said, I'll give you $35,000 if you relinquish all rights to McKinley. So I guess it went from $100,000 that she was going to give me to $35,000 now that she was going to give me. And of course, that was a big non-starter. I had a 50-50 order. So then came the lying and the cheating and the stealing. Then came reports to Department of Child Services that I was somehow abusing him. It then came, then she took him to doctors and she took him to the police and all the things that happened. And everybody told her the same thing. And I'll tell that one story about the police because I think it's kind of important for people. But everybody told her the same thing. You got to give the child back. And, it just got worse and worse and worse. And finally, on September 19, 2020, when she was supposed to make an exchange, she didn't. And she refused thereafter. She then took McKinley to his pediatrician and claimed to the pediatrician that McKinley was being abused. The pediatrician said, you are out of your mind. There's no evidence of abuse whatsoever, and this is clearly part of a divorce case, and I'm not going to get involved. And actually wrote that into her notes on this. Not getting satisfaction there, she then took McKinley to Children's Hospital of Phoenix and claimed abuse there. They examined him, found absolutely no signs of abuse, and essentially told her to leave. She then went to the Gilbert Police Department. The Gilbert Police Department, which I had no idea about, of course, the Gilbert Police Department then called me, and this is something very, very important for alienated parents to understand. When a parent comes in and says, my child's been abused, sexually, physically, whatever it is, you're not going to get a nice call from the police asking for your side of the story. You're going to get a very abusive call, a very accusatory call, demanding that you come in for questioning. And the moment you say, well, do I need a lawyer for this? You're going to get yelled at and screamed at. And, well, why would you need a lawyer? You don't need a lawyer. You have to understand that this is how the system works. And it's still a big problem here. So I get a call, roughly at the end of September, as I'm filing motions with the court to try to get this child back under the court's order. And for all practical purposes, the court's giving me the order saying, yes, the child has to go back. Here's the rub, and this is something else for parents to understand. There are some places in the United States where cities and counties will go in, take the child from the parent who's not supposed to have them, and hand them to you. There are an awful lot of cities and counties in the United States where they will not do this, where they say it's a matter of the court. And you say, well, but I have a court order. Why won't you enforce the court order? And they say, not our problem. We're not going to do it. And so unless you can get a writ of habeas corpus or something else, or get the federal court involved, you're not getting your kid back. Now, your partner might be held in contempt. They might be fined. They might lose rights. That could all happen. But in that moment when your child is not being returned to you, there is very little you're going to get out of the police department. They'll run a welfare check, but that's about it. So if you're concerned that they've been taken out of the city, out of the state, that kind of thing, you can deal with that. But past that, even the FBI generally will not get directly involved with an abducted child if both of the parents essentially have rights to the child. So even if it's perfectly clear, it's your day, it's your time, it's your everything, if you don't have sole custody of that child, do not expect help from the FBI. They won't do it. It generally won't even go out as any kind of an alert, an amber or silver alert. Doesn't happen. So, I'm sitting there screaming at the Mesa Police Department, I have a court order. And the Mesa Police are saying, we don't care. And I say, well, what if I go in and I get a court order ordering you to go in and get the child and bring them out specifically? And they said, we will ignore it. So here's the police department for the city of Mesa, Arizona, stating, we don't care what a superior court judge orders. We are not going to enforce the orders. That's our policy. You're out of luck. So at that point, she then brings the child to the Gilbert Police Department because she had lived, and I still lived, in the city of Gilbert. I get a call from a police detective, a female police detective. It was a very nasty call. She called and demanded that I come in for questioning. I had no idea what it was about, and I didn't even know it was about McKinley at the time. So as I'm asking her questions, she says, I'm not going to tell you. You just need to come in and we have questions for you. Yeah, I'm a lawyer. We don't do that. So I said, am I bringing a lawyer to this? What's this about? Well, why would you need a lawyer? You don't need a lawyer. You shouldn't have to have a lawyer here. You haven't done anything wrong, right? And she's half. I've done this long enough. I'm like, whatever. I'll be there. We'll sort it out, whatever it is. I had the appointment scheduled for about a week later where I was going to come in and be interviewed. In the meantime, they took McKinley to a forensic psychologist and had him evaluated by the forensic psychologist. And the forensic psychologist kept asking him questions, and he kept not really understanding the question because there was nothing to ask. Nothing had ever happened. Finally, they said to McKinley, and this is actually in the police report, they said to McKinley, is there anything you're mad at your dad about? And McKinley said, yes. And they said, oh, good, what? And they said, I want to listen to music when I go to sleep at night, and my dad won't let me. And at that point, they released McKinley. The detective called me, apologized profusely, said, your child is wonderful. There's nothing wrong with him. This is crap. We're so sorry. I'm sorry for the way I treated you in this. And I'm going to call your soon-to-be ex-spouse right now and tell her she needs to get back the child, which fell on deaf ears. She never did. And so then after that, came the swatting. We've heard about swatting a lot lately. For people who don't know what it is, let me describe it for a moment. Swatting essentially is where a third party calls the police and reports some kind of violent crime going on, usually at your house, to try to get the police to rush over with guns drawn. And of course, if the police think it's an emergency, what are they going to do? They're going to kick in the door and come flying in through the front door or the back door. You don't know. And so the chances of you thinking it's a home invasion rob or some other nefarious act is very high. And the chances of you being killed are pretty great because they've got guns you probably don't. And if you do have a gun, it's even worse. So what started to happen after these failures was a set of swatting. Now, remember, which is kind of hard for everybody, I think, to get the picture of, but at the same time, I still have clients here. I'm still investigating. I'm still investigating racketeering, fraud, bribery, corruption in Arizona, specifically within the court system, certainly within the cities and counties. I mean, it's a big deal investigation at this point, and it's expanded because during the time that my former spouse was looking to have witness protection, part of witness protection is that you have to come clean with everything you're involved in. You can't hold anything back. So a lot of what we understood about what she had been involved in came specifically from her talking about it and providing evidence of it. So we now had a big full-blown investigation going on for both private clients and public clients where we were looking into all of this. So we were in danger from just that alone, let alone her calling the police and making false police reports. So she would call the police and say, my ex-husband is at such and such location, and he just threatened to come over and blow my head off. And of course, the problem is that the police didn't say, could you send us a copy of the text message or a copy of the email or even show us proof that a phone call occurred? And of course, there wasn't any. This is what swatting is. Usually it's done anonymously, but as you and I talked about before we went on air, this is a very, very common practice in parental alienation, where the parent taking the child will call the police and say, he's abusing me, he's abusing our child, he's called and threatened me, et cetera, et cetera. And as we spoke earlier, there was just a case in Great Britain of a woman sentenced to about a month in jail for doing exactly this, for calling in fake swatting attempts on her ex-husband to try to prevent him from having their child. So it's not unusual. It happens all the time. But unfortunately, it's still not something the police fully are aware of or know what to do with. And there's very few consequences for this. There should be great ones. I'm glad to see this happening in Britain. We're going to be asking for some consequences on Brittany shortly. But this is a problem where judges just don't fully understand that this is going on. And again, there's sometimes this suspicion, well, you must have done something to provoke it. There must have been a conversation, when in fact, this is literally a scheme to take the child. So I spent most of the latter part of 2020 through 2021 trying to see my child. And every time we made arrangements to do that because the court order required it, what would happen is an hour beforehand, she would call a police agency wherever we were going to meet for the exchange and tell the police agency I just threatened to try to kill her or blow her head off, which of course makes even less sense if you think about the fact that I'm trying to see my child and she's supposed to be bringing the child. Why would she be getting threatened with anything? But this is the problem that kept coming up. And so to this day, that's essentially been the problem. So there isn't a way to, it's not that there isn't a court order, there is. It's just there's no way to enforce the court order. And like I said, my case being different than most people's, I have a situation here where the database for Maricopa County, which is Phoenix area, has been compromised and hacked into, where this was part of what she did in her criminal enterprises, was to hack into these databases to falsify judgments, falsify orders, etc. And she used all of this and the contacts within the court system to prepare a series of continually false orders. Like I said, we have roughly about 35 of these, and some of them are so obviously falsified by signature, by type, by design, by question documents methods that we do, that it's not really any question. So probably in the next month or so, the appellate court in Arizona is going to be asked to set aside and reverse everything that happened in the case from beginning of COVID, essentially. And we expect that's exactly what's going to happen. But, that still doesn't make for smooth exchanges. It still doesn't necessarily stop somebody from swatting. And it doesn't stop the damage that's been done to my son in the meantime.
So it's been years since you've seen him. And you have legal experience, you're trained, you seem to have all the knowledge that any parent would want, and it didn't change the outcome one bit.
No,
right?
And that's why I say, the problem is that Having a court order is terrific because it's better certainly than not having one. And when you go and you get either a temporary or the final custody order, and remember, custody orders can be modified later on. They always can. They're not set in stone. But when you get that temporary or final order from the court, you just assume that the other person is going to respect the process and respect the order. Or if they don't, that you're going to have law enforcement ability. Because the problem is that about the only thing that's available to a litigant is a contempt. And the problem with contempts is that it's not that they don't have teeth. Some do, some don't. But the problem with contempt is it still doesn't get your child. If the person is not going to go along with the court order, they're not going to really care that you filed the contempt. Or they'll start in with the swatting. They'll start in with the fake claims. They'll start in with the abuse excuse and everything else they can think of. And so the problem is that dumb little problem of I'm not giving you my child today. He's my child. He's not yours. I'm not giving him to you. I want to keep him with me. He doesn't want to go with you, whatever the excuse is. And mine didn't have any of that, by the way. She just said, I'm not making the exchange. But normally you get excuses. You get he's not feeling well today. Well, he doesn't feel like going today. I'm not going to make him. And when you finally realize that this is parental alienation, like I said, the best you could do is go into court and get a contempt. If you do that where you are, in Southern California, one of the big problems is that contempts, although they take priority, they are a priority matter in California courts. They take an awfully long time to process. You're not getting a court date on a contempt very quickly. First, you have to serve it personally. Then the person has to come in and be arraigned. And then they will normally plead, of course, not guilty, assuming they even show up. Then a trial has to be set. Depending on the possible penalties, it could even potentially be a jury trial. If they don't show up for the arraignment after being served, the court can issue a bench warrant, which means the next time they're at a traffic stop and the police stop them for speeding, they might or might not get hauled in, but you don't know when that's going to happen. And meanwhile, you still don't have your child. So one of the things that absolutely needs to change, immediately, is that, at least within the counties, is that when a superior court in a county issues an order, the sheriff's department has got to have the ability to go and execute on that order, including on custody orders. It's one thing if you think that the husband or wife has done something really bad and you think they're a danger to the child, that's fine. But your remedy, even if you decide it's so bad that you need to take the child, and that can happen. It's not that this never happens, it does. But what a lot of states now require, including California, is that if you take this child and you keep the child from the other parent, you have to immediately file something with the court, explaining to the court that you've done this and why you've done this, and setting up an emergency hearing so that the child has the least amount of disruption possible. In states like Arizona, none of that exists. So if a mother decides she's not going to exchange the child, there's nothing you can do. As long as the police will not enforce the order, there's literally zero you can do. And, one of the things I saw, which I really didn't know enough about with Arizona courts, but I saw while some of this was pending, is a lot of other parents yelling and screaming in courtrooms, why can't you get my child back? You executed an order, judge. It's your order. Do something. And the judges just kind of throwing their hands up and saying, there's not much I can do. So those are things that absolutely need to change. And I have been working a lot with, especially in Arizona, with the Arizona legislature to make those changes. Some of them have been made. A lot more will be made. I think that some of the filings we're going to have within both the Arizona state court and in the federal court, I think are going to cause a lot of that. We're going to be taking the state of Arizona and Maricopa County to federal court to have federal civil rights orders issued to change some of these laws to make it so that they must protect the order, they must enforce it, they must bring the child back so that this kind of problem doesn't happen.
Great. I love that. So let's talk about your son. How long has it been since you've not heard his voice?
He and I have not had a conversation since roughly September 16, 2020. And, and even though she has a limited presence on social media, she doesn't have anything that's even remotely public. So there are no photos that get sent. There's no phone calls. There's no cards, no letters, no nothing. And even when she has put him in school, she will say to the school, literally, she'll go into the office of the school and say, I'm afraid dad's going to kidnap him. And so the school takes it with some grain of salt. You have to remember at this point, schools have heard this before and have heard everything. So they take it with a little grain here. But, this is her MO. Every time she puts him somewhere or goes somewhere, she says, Dad's going to steal him. You got to watch out for Dad, on and on and on. which is kind of bizarre because I haven't lived in the state of Arizona since roughly about 2021. So it's not like I'm there to pick him up and take him. And it's horrible and it's sad. And it's sad for him. Like I said, in this particular case, as was the case with my older son, I was McKinley's primary caregiver. And so we spent the most time he spent with any adult on any given day was with me, not with his mother, not with his grandmother. So we had a very, very close bond, a very close relationship. And, I have a chapter devoted to this whole problem in the book about parental alienation and the problems that it causes for the child. There is no way for a child of this kind of alienation to come out unscathed. It doesn't happen, and they never will. It is not necessarily a lifetime of therapy, but there are a lot of issues that he will exhibit. One of the things I can tell you from experience, which obviously is a positive in a sense and a negative in a sense, is that, and this is something his mother doesn't understand, is that by the time he gets to be about 10, 11 years old, he's going to bolt. What happens with almost all of these kids, especially with boys, is that they get to 10 or 11, if they didn't figure this out earlier, they get how this works, they get what's going on with mom, they get that she's kept him from dad, and the child will run away, he'll leave. And in this day and age with cell phones, I'm obviously a very visible presence on the internet. It's very easy to find me, to call me, and he will do that. He's now 7. He's about 7.5. By another 2.5 years, he's out of there. And at that point, she won't get him back because he's not going to go. And so however dumb this was, and whatever she thought was going to happen, it's not how it's going to turn out, and it never does. And I can tell you from experience with clients who have gone through this, where families have spent hundreds of thousands of dollars to just absolutely trash the mother or trash the father and take the child, that ultimately by the time the child becomes a preteen, they're out of there, and you kind of lose all semblance of a relationship. And that's what's going to happen with her. And that's very sad because he deserves both parents, and that's not what's going to wind up happening. And like I said, it's something I think that parents who do this don't fully understand. Now, I do understand, I'll say this for parents out there who are watching, I do understand that there are situations with teens especially where the divorce and the alienation happens at the teenage level, and that's very different. At the teenage level when that happens, teens can often be talked into mom's horrible or dad's horrible or whatever, and it becomes a different set of problems. But for young children, especially when they have a particular bond with the parent, it works very differently. And like I said, by the time they're preteens, they want out from the parent who took them.
So for your case, what are next steps?
Well, for me, there's a couple of things. Like I said, I did something that normally people don't do. I wrote a very long, very specific book about the investigation that we did, exactly who she is, exactly what she has done, exactly how that fit into what we were doing with the investigation. And we didn't hold back. The people who know the book, Report to the Governor, understand that we named names. We didn't hold back at all from public officials who were taking bribes, and not just in my situation. One of the things about the book is that it chronicles a 4-year investigation into the state of Arizona, and specifically into Maricopa County, which is the greater Phoenix area. This book covers all of the investigation. And as people probably know, a lot of things have changed in Arizona since the book was published. One of the things that we did, for example, is that we got to not only provide the findings of the report to Governor Doug Ducey, the former governor, in May of 2022, we actually made a presentation to the legislature, to a joint session of the House and Senate of the state of Arizona, looking into fraud and racketeering, et cetera, in 2023, so roughly 2 years ago, where we presented to them our findings, all of our findings, including naming names, naming what happened here, explaining what happened with the child abduction, et cetera. So my story got out in a way that most people's don't. Most people don't have that luxury. You do a wonderful job with what you do. That's certainly for sure. But a lot of people don't get their stories out, and certainly not in a very public way. So family and friends know, but other people don't. So I have a very large following now on X. I do podcasts. I talk about child abductions. I also talk about human trafficking and other areas related to children and child abuse because I can. And that's made me much more of a focal point for this, to the degree that my ex-spouse, who, by the way, refused to give up my last name, now only uses the last initial of my name because she is now so infamous for what she did. So in her professional life, on her LinkedIn, everything else, she simply goes by Brittany, initial T, instead of saying Thaler, because that ties her into this. So anything I can do to make her life uncomfortable in this way, to make it so that it's not a win, so that every day, if she's already paranoid, she has to be paranoid about what's going to happen and what court papers are going to be filed and what's going to be served on her. Great, all the better. She should have to live her life that way. You don't take a child, ever. And so we're going to be filing with both the federal court civil rights violations on what Maricopa County did and the way it handled the case, and of course allowing for the intrusion into the database, allowing for the falsified orders, et cetera. But we're also going to be filing something in Arizona called a petition for special action, which you can think of as kind of being like an appeal. The difference is that a petition for special action is when you don't really have an appeal, but you have a problem. And so one of the things we're going to be doing is we're going to be informing the appellate court and the Supreme Court for the state of Arizona exactly what happened here, how it happened, who was involved, who took bribes to do it. There was a child custody advisor along the way that the court appointed who literally took bribes, who is now known for that because we investigated her. And we're going to basically make changes here. We're going to get almost everything set aside and vacated. We're gonna have orders for the child to be returned either from the federal court or from the state appellate court. And McKinley's going to be returned. It's a process. It doesn't happen overnight, but we have the evidence, we have the facts, we have everything we need. And that's where we're pressing forward now on.
Great. So one last question. Hopefully you can answer it as we close out. For our listeners, any thoughts on what they should be looking for when they come across parental alienation and they start their pursuit for legal counsel?
Well, what I would say is that they're like almost everything else. We talk about it with children when we're afraid our children might be taking drugs and what kinds of behaviors we might see. The way they isolate from family and friends, the way they're not getting, their homework goes down in quality, their schoolwork goes down, they start skipping school, start acting up, won't answer questions, even basic questions like, how was your day? We talk to parents oftentimes about that. And as anybody who's been a parent who especially has now an adult child, we know what those questions are. You have to get out of the mindset that because you once loved this person and married this person, that they're somehow going to have an empathy similar to your own. The mistake we all make is we believe that if we're empathic, they must be empathic too. And the fact is, it doesn't work that way. And that's the real danger here that people have to watch out for. There can be warning signs. Like I said, an offer of $100,000 to take this child is a red flag. And even if you don't want to believe that your partner will do this, that should tell you something, and it should have told me something. Obviously, when you've got 2 other abductions, a third one is not a big surprise. I just thought we had this under control, and it turned out we didn't. And the other thing, too, is that you don't have to live your life as a parent, as a divorced parent, constantly worried about this. That won't help you. But you do have to have an action plan. You don't have to keep every conversation. You don't have to save everything. But like one of the things that I did is I have on my cell phone every saved conversation, every set of text messages, everything is there. So when I present a picture and I say, this was the relationship I had with this person, you can see that none of this ever happened. You can see that she's lying. They can go through thousands upon thousands of text messages from everything from what time are you going to be home from dinner, honey, to how was your day, on and on and on, to see how the relationship worked, to see the difference, to see that there was never any violence in the relationship, there was never any issue. Keep this stuff. Keep the communications. The other thing, too, which I would say to parents is, and it's very important, is that when things aren't working, whether it's after you're separated or especially before, you've got to get the necessary help emotionally to control yourself, to control your emotions. Not because you're going to do anything wrong, but because everything you say and do at that point is going to ultimately be under a microscope. And any word, any phrase, anything is going to be misconstrued on purpose by the other side. If not specifically by your spouse, almost your former spouse, by their lawyer. If somebody wants to come in and fight, and I've seen this not so much between spouses, but between the parents of spouses, who will come in and spend hundreds of thousands of dollars to allegedly protect their child. And they'll spend this kind of money, and they'll dissect all of this, and they'll go through everything and find any little word, any little phrase, any little anything, and try to make it into something. So, make sure you keep a hold of your emotions. And if it does go wrong, immediately see a lawyer. They're expensive. We are not cheap people. I get it. You could spend your whole life savings fighting these things. I get that too. But the reality of it is that you've got to have somebody who understands this process. One of the things you and I talked about again before we came on the air was I created a foundation out of this, the McKinleyProject.org. And one of the things that we do is we assist families of abducted children. We assist them, in the legal processes, and even to some degree with just support and where to go and what to do, because a lot of people are absolutely lost. We have been very successful in getting children back, but you have to know how to do it, and you have to explain to the parent, we're going to get the child back. You have to let the process play out, because we're not going to kidnap him back and then have him taken it back and forth. You're not going to do that. So you have to have a lawyer who understands the process, understands the judges involved, understands implicitly what parental alienation and child abduction are, and what essentially are the psychological factors with the other parent, including that they're probably sociopathic, they're certainly narcissistic, and what that means in terms of going into court, what that means in terms of them lying. In a case I recently had in San Diego, the mother had been married previously and had abducted that child and had pushed the father out of her daughter's life. So it wasn't really a surprise when she did it again. And that's one of the things too, for people who are getting into a second or third marriage where there's kids involved, how your soon-to-be new spouse treats her own children, how that relationship works, tells you a lot about what's going to happen in your relationship. We sometimes joke, you can tell how somebody is by how they treat their dog or their cat. It's kind of the same thing here. And, so you have to see signs of that. The other thing too, I say it this way, spouses who are problematic or who are likely to be problematic often don't have many friends. Because normal people don't put up with this. Normal people don't appreciate this kind of thing. And in fact, in my divorce from my first wife, a friend of her family came to me and said, I've seen some of the papers in your case. This never happened, and I'm going to testify in your favor. And I said, well, you don't have to do that. I don't want to screw up the relationships you have with these people. You've been friends for years. He said, no, I have children. And if I ever get a divorce from my wife, I don't want to be in the same position where people are allowed to come in and lie about me. I'm not going to put up with it. Good people won't put up with the lie. Good people will see through it. So oftentimes an alienating parent will have some support from within the family, oftentimes because there's so much abuse and dysfunction in the family that they'll do it. So one of the things you look for somebody who's likely to alienate is somebody who doesn't have a lot of friends, doesn't have, but has a very, I don't want to use the word incestuous in the wrong way, but has a very, kind of unhealthy relationship with family, where this is going to be a family attack, where the family is going to kind of create a barrier to you being able to see your child. Those are the kinds of things I would look for. And that's really all the best you can do. But if it does happen, or you think it's happening, immediately get on the phone with a lawyer, with a family court attorney who really actually knows child abuse and child abduction and alienation. Not all do, they're not all the same, but you need to be very careful to get somebody who does understand and knows how to go through the process of this.
Great. John, it's been so enjoyable to talk with you, even though it's a terrible topic and it's a terrible outcome for you and your son. And we thank you for joining. How would you like our listeners to reach you if they have any questions?
They can reach me several ways. One way is they can reach me at my email. We do try to respond as best as we can. The email to use, the best email to use for this is JHTLAW, so JHT, my initials, JHTlaw at MSN.com. They can also reach me by going to either the McKinleyProject.org, one word, the McKinleyProject.org, or going to reporttothegovernor.com, which is the website set up for the book. From there, we have email connections so they can learn more about the book. They can learn more about me, of course. They can see interviews that I've done, and they can contact me directly. And if that doesn't work, you can always, on the internet, it's great. I'm listed. My numbers are listed, and they can call as well. Usually the best thing to do is to first either text me or send me an email, tell me what's going on, and then I will get back to you, and I promise I'll spend, whatever time I can going through the issue that you're having. But as I said, since my story with McKinley became public, I think I've had calls really from all over the world, and certainly a lot from the United States and all over the United States, from parents who are suffering very similar situations.
Great. Thanks. We'll make sure we have that on our posting as well. And John, thanks again for joining the Fractured Families Podcast.
Thank you.
Thank you for joining me on this episode of the Fractured Families Podcast. I hope our conversation has provided you with support, understanding, and actionable insights to help you navigate your own family challenges. Remember, healing is a journey, and reaching out for help is a sign of strength. You're not alone. If you found value in today's episode, please subscribe, rate, and leave a review. Your support helps us reach more families in need. You can contact me on social media at Parental Alienation is Real and visit our website for additional resources and ways to get involved. Stay strong, stay connected, and keep fighting for the family bonds that matter most. Until next time, take care and stay resilient.